The radio crackled with static and desperation. Captain Marcus Webb's voice broke through the interference, each word weighted with the knowledge that comes only when a man accepts his death. "Command, this is Saber 1 Actual. We're out of options. 27 souls here. Tell my wife I tried. Tell them all I failed." The transmission cut to white noise, then silence. Somewhere in the Hindu Kush Mountains, surrounded by rocky outcrops and enemy fire, an entire company sat pinned like insects under glass. The Taliban had chosen their ground well, a narrow valley with no escape routes, perfect fields of fire, and patience enough to wait for nightfall when thermal optics would turn the Americans into glowing targets. At Bagram Airfield, operations officers stared at screens showing the rapidly deteriorating situation. Fast movers were 30 minutes out. Apache were grounded by a dust storm rolling across the desert like divine punishment. The only aircraft available was a single A-10 Thunderbolt II returning from a routine patrol, already low on ammunition, piloted by someone the tower crew barely acknowledged. When the duty officer relayed the coordinates, there was a pause. Then a woman's voice came through, flat and professional. "Copy all. Saber 1, this is Reaper 7. I'm 12 minutes out. Keep your heads down." The operations center went quiet. Someone muttered something about desperation. Another officer picked up his coffee and turned away from the radio. They'd all seen her file. Captain Elena Vasquez, 32 years old, distinguished Flying Cross recipient from a previous deployment nobody talked about. She'd flown close air support missions in Syria that ended careers and generated congressional inquiries. Not because she failed, because she succeeded in ways that made people uncomfortable. Because she'd put an aircraft into places the manual said couldn't be done, saved Marines that doctrine said couldn't be saved, and refused to apologize for the collateral calculus that came with urban warfare. The Air Force had quietly shuffled her to Afghanistan, to a squadron that flew milk runs and showed the flag. Punishment disguised as assignment. Now she was the only option. Her A-10 appeared on the operations center's tracking system, a single blue icon moving fast toward a sea of hostile red contacts. The aircraft was already 7,000 pounds below its optimal combat weight. She'd been flying for 3 hours. The Warthog was designed for punishment, but physics doesn't negotiate. Someone should have waved her off, should have told her to conserve assets, wait for better options. Nobody did. Because deep down, even the skeptics understood the arithmetic of war. 27 Americans were going to die unless someone decided mathematics mattered less than will. Elena Vasquez pushed her throttles forward and dropped altitude, the mountains rising around her like the walls of a cathedral built for violence. The Taliban had learned patience from mountains that had stood for millennia. They'd positioned PKM machine guns along the ridgeline, overlapping fields of fire that turned the valley floor into a killing zone. Mortars were pre-registered on every piece of cover. The Americans had stumbled into a textbook ambush, and now Captain Webb's company sat trapped in a dried riverbed with wounded men bleeding into Afghan dust and ammunition counters ticking toward zero. Webb pressed himself against a boulder, radio handset slick with someone else's blood. Around him, soldiers returned fire in disciplined 3-round bursts, making every magazine count. His youngest private, a kid from Kansas named Morrison, had taken shrapnel in both legs and kept calling for his mother between morphine-induced silences. The staff sergeant, a veteran of 4 deployments, was calculating how long they could hold before being overrun. His estimate was 40 minutes, maybe less. Then everyone heard it, that sound, the distinctive whine of twin turbofan engines, different from every other aircraft in the inventory. The A-10's General Electric TF-34 engines produced a noise that Marines called the sound of freedom and insurgents called the devil's breathing. It echoed off the mountains, impossible to pinpoint, everywhere and nowhere. Elena saw the valley through her heads-up display, the infrared sensors painting the scene in shades of thermal truth. 27 heat signatures clustered in defensive positions. Approximately 60 hostiles in elevated positions with crew-served weapons. 3 mortar teams. No margin for error. She toggled her radio. Sabre 1 Actual, Reaper 7. I need you to mark your position with smoke. Green if you've got it, orange if you're improvising. Webb's response came fast. Reaper 7, we're in a dry wadi 100 meters north of the burning Humvee. No smoke available. We're danger close on all sides. Alina's jaw tightened. Danger close meant within 200 meters of friendly positions. The A-10's GAU-8 Avenger cannon fired 30mm rounds at nearly 4,000 rounds per minute. At danger close range, the margin between salvation and fratricide measured in feet, not yards. Copy danger close. Sabre 1, I need every man to get as low as physically possible. I'm coming in from the north, gun run hot, 60 seconds. She banked hard, dropping to 300 feet above the valley floor. The A-10's titanium bathtub cockpit was designed to take hits, but at this altitude, even small arms fire could be catastrophic. The aircraft shuddered as she pushed it through mountain turbulence. Below, Taliban fighters tracked her movement, fingers tightening on triggers. They'd seen A-10s before, knew their capabilities, but they also knew the Americans were trapped. One aircraft couldn't change the equation. That was doctrine. That was logic. Alina Vasquez had made a career of proving logic insufficient. She armed the GAU-8, felt the familiar weight of the aircraft shift as the cannon's 7 barrels began their rotation. The targeting computer painted crosshairs over enemy positions. Her thumb hovered over the trigger. Everything narrowed to breath, distance, and decision. The first gun run announced itself like apocalypse. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon unleashed a sound that defied description, part thunder, part fabric tearing, part the universe splitting open. 70 rounds per second of depleted uranium crossed the space between aircraft and target faster than sound itself. The Taliban fighters on the eastern ridgeline simply ceased to exist. Their positions dissolved into smoke and concussive force. Rock face shattered. Machine gun emplacements disappeared into craters. The noise reached the pinned Americans a split second after the impacts, rolling through the valley like judgment rendered in tungsten and physics. Morrison stopped crying. Webb stopped breathing for 3 seconds. Every soldier in that wadi felt their chest cavities vibrate with the percussion. Alina pulled up hard, the A-10 groaning against forces trying to tear it apart. Tracers followed her climb, green streaks against brown mountain. She felt one impact, a metallic ping that meant someone had gotten lucky. The aircraft system showed no critical damage. She banked left, already lining up the next approach. Sabre 1, Reaper 7, Eastern Ridge is neutralized. Mortar teams are next. Stay down. She didn't wait for acknowledgement. The Taliban mortars had repositioned, trying to dial in the American positions before the aircraft could make another pass. Alina could see their heat signatures through the targeting pod, small clusters of men working with trained efficiency. They'd been fighting Americans for 20 years. They understood combined arms. They just hadn't encountered Alina Vasquez. She came in low from the west, using a ridgeline to mask her approach. The A-10's ugly, ungainly profile worked in her favor here, designed for survivability, not aesthetics. She popped up over the rocks at the last possible second, acquired targets, fired. The Hydra rockets rippled out from under her wings, 7 streaks of white smoke that terminated in orange blooms. 2 mortar teams evaporated. The third scattered, men running in panic as their ammunition cooked off in secondary explosions. But Alina was already taking fire from multiple positions. The Taliban had repositioned, creating a gauntlet she'd have to fly through. RPG trails arced toward her. She jinked right, then left, the stick responding with the hydraulic precision that made the Warthog legendary. Something hit her left engine. The fire warning light illuminated. Temperature gauges spiked into the red. Standard procedure would be to egress, climb to safe altitude, assess damage. She toggled the fire suppression system and dove back into the valley. Reaper 7, you're trailing smoke, Webb called, his voice tight with concern and disbelief. Acknowledged, I'm not finished. Below, the Americans watched smoke pour from the A-10's left engine, black against the mountain sky. The aircraft was wounded but still fighting, still circling, still delivering death with surgical precision. The operations center at Bagram had gone completely silent. Every officer, every enlisted specialist, every person with access to the live feed watched Elena Vasquez fly a dying aircraft into a meat grinder. The left engine was hemorrhaging oil pressure. The hydraulic system showed intermittent failures. She should have been climbing to altitude, looking for somewhere flat to put down. Instead, she was making her fourth gun run, the damaged A-10 listing slightly but still deadly. A colonel nobody had noticed before stood near the back of the room. He was older, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades in cockpits. He watched the screen with an expression carved from stone. When a younger officer muttered something about recklessness, the colonel spoke without turning. "That's not recklessness. That's someone who's decided mathematics matters less than Marines, soldiers, whatever. Watch and learn." Elena's hands moved with practiced economy. The stick, the throttles, the weapon systems, all extensions of decision compressed into microseconds. She could feel the aircraft struggling, the left engine producing thrust in irregular surges. The fire suppression had bought time, not victory. Smoke obscured her left mirror. She flew on instruments and instinct. "Saber One, I need a target priority. What's keeping you pinned?" Webb's voice came back immediately. "Western Ridge, 200 meters from our position. They've got a DSHK heavy machine gun. Every time we try to move our wounded, they cut us apart." The DSHK, Russian-made 50 caliber equivalent belt-fed, effective range over a mile. In trained hands, it could chew through light armor. It could absolutely destroy exposed soldiers. Elena called up the targeting pod, magnified the Western Ridge. There. She could see the gun crew, 4 men working the weapon with professional efficiency. They were good. Disciplined fire, conserving ammunition, moving between shots to avoid counter-battery. They'd been doing this for years. She checked her ammunition counter. The GAU-8 had less than 200 rounds remaining. Rockets were expended. The Maverick missiles she carried were designed for armor, too much weapon for personnel. She'd have to use the gun. The targeting solution was complicated by terrain and distance. The DSHK position was partially covered by an overhang, protected from high-angle attacks. She'd need to come in flat, parallel to the ridge, thread a needle at 300 knots with a damaged aircraft. Webb watched her A-10 line up for an approach that seemed geometrically impossible. The valley was narrow. The ridgeline was irregular. She'd be exposed to fire from 3 directions. His staff sergeant looked up from his rifle. "Sir, she's going to crash." Webb shook his head slowly. "No, she's not." Elena's breathing slowed. The cockpit sounds faded, alarms, warnings, the laboring engine. Everything reduced to the approaching ridge and the men who needed her to be perfect. She dropped to 200 feet, then 150. The mountains filled her canopy, brown and ancient and indifferent. The targeting crosshairs danced over the DSHK position. The aircraft shook from turbulence and damage. She compensated, made minute adjustments, felt the stick respond with the loyalty machines show to pilots who understand them. The gun crew saw her coming. They traversed the DSHK, leading the target, fingers ready. The gunner was experienced, patient. He waited for the right moment, that instant when the aircraft would be fully committed to its path. Elena fired first. The GAU-8 erupted in a 3-second burst that consumed her remaining ammunition. Depleted uranium rounds traveling at 3,000 feet per second impacted rock and flesh with equal indifference. The DSHK position ceased to exist, carved out of the mountain by a weapon designed to kill Soviet tanks. For a moment there was only sound, the echoing roar of the cannon, the whine of engines, the whistle of wind through damaged control surfaces. Then silence rushed in, profound and heavy. Webb keyed his radio. "Reaper 7, that's all of them. You got them all. We can move." Elena pulled up, the aircraft protesting every degree of climb. The left engine temperature was critical. Oil pressure was nearly zero. She'd pushed the Warthog beyond its limits, and now it demanded payment. "Saber One, I'm going to orbit at altitude while you get your wounded consolidated. Dustoff is inbound, 12 minutes out." Her voice remained level, professional. Webb could hear the strain underneath. "Reaper 7, you need to egress. That's smoke. I'm staying until Dustoff has you. Keep moving." Below, Americans lifted wounded comrades and began the careful movement toward an evacuation site. Every man who could walk did. Those who couldn't were carried. Morrison, the kid from Kansas, watched the sky where the damaged A-10 circled, smoke trailing behind it like a torn flag. He was 19 years old and would never forget this moment, would tell his children about it, would carry it as the dividing line between who he'd been and who he became. In the operations center, officers watched Alina's aircraft orbit, the smoke trail growing thicker. The colonel in the back pulled out his phone, made a call that would bypass 3 layers of command. When someone answered, he said only, "You need to see this. Right now." The rescue helicopters appeared as dark crosses against the afternoon sun. 2 Blackhawks escorted by a pair of Apache that looked almost disappointed to find no targets remaining. They swept the valley, sensors confirming what their eyes reported. The Taliban had withdrawn, leaving behind destroyed equipment, and the tactical reality that this ground now belonged to whoever controlled the air. Webb popped purple smoke, marking the landing zone. The Blackhawks came in fast, flared hard, and settled into the dust with the practiced efficiency of crews who'd done this hundreds of times. Medics poured out before the wheels fully touched down. They moved with organized urgency, triaging wounded, loading litters, calling out medical shorthand. Morrison went on the first bird, still conscious enough to look up at the sky where the damaged A-10 maintained its protective orbit. His sergeant leaned close. "Remember her call sign, kid. Reaper 7. Remember it." The second Blackhawk loaded the remaining wounded in half the company. Webb stayed behind with a security element, waiting for the final extraction. He watched Alina's aircraft through binoculars, saw the smoke getting darker, the flight path becoming more erratic. She was fighting to keep it flying. The left engine had to be completely dead by now. The Apache pilots had noticed too. One of them radioed her directly. "Reaper 7, Viper 2-1. Your condition is deteriorating. Recommend immediate emergency landing at nearest friendly base." Alina's response came through strained but firm. "Viper 2-1, I'm maintaining station until all personnel are extracted. Appreciate the concern." "Reaper 7, you've got maybe 10 minutes of flight time. That's not a suggestion." "Understood. I've got 12 minutes until final extraction is complete. I can make that math work." Webb keyed his radio. "Reaper 7, Sabre 1 actual. Captain, we're secure here. The Apache have us covered." "You've done enough. Get yourself home." There was a pause. When Alina spoke again, her voice carried something beyond fatigue, beyond pain, something that sounded like acceptance of a covenant made long before today. "Sabre 1, I started this contract when I saw your situation. I finish it when your wheel's up, not before." The third Blackhawk arrived 6 minutes later. Webb and his remaining soldiers loaded quickly, weapons outboard, eyes scanning terrain that had nearly become their grave. As the helicopter lifted off, Webb pressed against the window, watching the circling A-10. The smoke trail was continuous now, a dark smear across the Afghan sky. The pilot had to be manually controlling every system, flying on instinct and determination. The Black Hawk pilot followed his gaze and shook his head with something like reverence. "That's either the bravest or the craziest pilot I've ever seen." Webb thought about the radio call he'd made, the resignation in his own voice when he'd accepted death. Thought about the woman who'd refused to accept it. "Both," he said. "Definitely both." The moment Webb's helicopter cleared the valley, Alina allowed herself to acknowledge what her body had been screaming for the past 20 minutes. Her left hand was shaking from muscle fatigue. Her right shoulder burned from holding the stick in constant adjustment. The sweat running down her spine had nothing to do with the cockpit temperature. She'd been flying on adrenaline and will, and now both were approaching depletion. She keyed the radio. "Viper 2-1, Reaper 7. All personnel extracted. I'm heading for Bagram, but I'm not confident in making it. What's the nearest suitable landing site?" The Apache pilot responded immediately. "Reaper 7, there's a forward operating base about 18 miles northeast of your position. Fob Shank. They've got a runway that can take you, and emergency response already on standby. We're sending you the coordinates now." The navigation system updated. 18 miles. Might as well have been 1,000. The left engine was completely dead, the right one running hot enough to cook eggs on the turbine. The hydraulic pressure was dropping into ranges the manual described with red text and dire warnings. The flight control systems were degraded to the point where she was manually trimming every few seconds just to maintain level flight. But 18 miles was a number. Numbers could be calculated. Physics could be negotiated with if you understood the terms. Alina adjusted her heading, though responding sluggishly, like a wounded animal that knows it's dying but trusts you enough to keep trying. The titanium bathtub that surrounded her cockpit had been designed by engineers who understood that A-10 pilots would push their aircraft into situations where death was likely. They'd built in redundancy, armor, and systems that degraded gracefully rather than failing catastrophically. She was about to test every one of those design decisions. The mountains fell away beneath her. The Afghan landscape spread out in browns and tans, beautiful in its harshness. She thought about her father, a Marine Corps pilot who'd flown Hueys in Vietnam and told her stories about the brotherhood that forms when people face death together. He died when she was 15, cancer from Agent Orange, but his words had carved themselves into her soul. Alina, you fly for the people on the ground. Everything else is just noise. The noise was loud now. Alarms cascading through the cockpit, each one demanding attention, all of them pointing toward the same conclusion. The aircraft was dying. She talked to it anyway, like her father had taught her. Come on, beautiful, just a little further. You've got this. We've got this. The Apache flanked her, their pilots maintaining a protective formation they wouldn't leave until she was on the ground. They understood. The Apache crews had their own stories of close calls and saved lives. Fob Shank appeared on the horizon, a collection of buildings and fortifications that looked like civilization's last argument against chaos. The control tower had been tracking Alina's approach for 10 minutes, watching her altitude bleed away as she coaxed the crippled A-10 across the final miles. They'd cleared the runway, positioned fire trucks, and said quiet prayers that had nothing to do with regulations. The tower controller's voice came through steady and calm. Reaper 7, Shank Tower. Runway 23 is clear. Wind is negligible. Emergency crews are standing by. You're cleared for straighten approach. Alina acknowledged, began her descent. The right engine coughed, stuttered, then resumed its labored operation. The hydraulic failure lights illuminated. She was transitioning to manual reversion mode, flying with cables and muscle instead of powered assistance. The stick felt like it was mired in concrete. She fought it, made small corrections, kept the nose aligned with the distant runway. At 5 miles out, the right engine quit, completely. The sudden silence was profound. The A-10 became a glider, a 30,000-pound piece of metal with the aerodynamic properties of a brick. But bricks fell predictably, followed paths that could be calculated. Alina had altitude, not much but enough. Maybe. She adjusted her glide slope, sacrificing speed for distance. The airspeed indicator dropped through 200 knots, then 180. The stall warning began its insistent beeping. She ignored it, focused on the runway growing in her windscreen. The Apache had peeled off, giving her space. Their pilots watched, silent, bearing witness. 1 mile out, the aircraft was mushing, barely flying, held aloft by velocity and desperation. Alina could see individual people now, fire crews standing ready, soldiers stopping whatever they were doing to watch. She dropped the landing gear manually. 3 green lights. Small miracles counted. Half a mile. The ground rose to meet her, brown earth that had seen countless aircraft land and countless soldiers die. The A-10 was below safe approach speed, the controls barely responding. She'd get one chance at this. If she bounced, if she landed hard, if the gear collapsed, the aircraft would cartwheel and explode. Quarter mile. She was threading a needle made of probability and physics. The stick felt dead in her hands, but she could feel the aircraft, sense its balance point. Her father's voice in her memory, trust the machine, trust yourself, they're the same thing. The runway threshold passed beneath her. She pulled the nose up slightly, felt the wheels touch, main gear first, then nose. The touchdown was hard but controlled. The wounded aircraft bounced once, settled, and rolled. Alina applied brakes with hydraulics that barely existed, the shuddering down the runway. She could see fire trucks racing alongside, matching her speed. The aircraft finally stopped 3/4 of the way down the runway, trailing smoke from both engines. covered in carbon scoring and small-caliber bullet holes that maintenance crews would count later at 37 distinct impacts. She shut down the remaining systems, the switches clicking with finality. When she released the stick, her hand didn't want to open, fingers locked from sustained tension. The canopy opened to afternoon heat and the smell of burning metal and hydraulic fluid. Fire crews surrounded the aircraft, hosing down the engines with flame-retardant foam. A crew chief appeared on the ladder, his face showing the expression of someone who just watched physics and determination reach a temporary truce. "Ma'am, you good? Any injuries?" Alina unbuckled with hands that had started shaking now that she'd allowed them to. "I'm good. How's the bird?" The crew chief looked at the A-10, took in the damage, the smoke, the fluid leaking from multiple systems. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this aircraft should be in pieces across a mountainside. Whatever you did to get it here, that's going in the history books." She climbed down slowly, legs uncertain after the adrenaline crash. Soldiers had gathered around the aircraft, maintaining respectful distance but unable to look away. One of them, a sergeant with a combat infantry badge and too many deployment patches, stepped forward. "Captain, we've been monitoring the radio traffic. What you did for Sabre One." He didn't finish the sentence. Couldn't. Alina just nodded. Words felt insufficient. They always did after moments like this. The FOB commander arrived in a Humvee, a lieutenant colonel who'd seen enough combat to recognize significance when it presented itself. He walked around the damaged A-10, stopped in front of Alina, and rendered a salute that carried weight beyond protocol. "Captain Vasquez, your aircraft is done, but you saved 27 soldiers today." Alina returned the salute, allowed herself a small smile. "Sir, the aircraft did the work. I just pointed it in the right direction." The lieutenant colonel glanced at the bullet holes, the scorched engines, the smoking wreckage that had somehow stayed airborne through will and engineering. "Captain, I've been in Afghanistan for 3 tours. I've seen a lot of pilots. What you just did flying a dead aircraft to protect soldiers during extraction, that's beyond training. That's beyond duty." He paused, choosing words carefully. "That's what legends are made of." Alina looked at her aircraft, the ugly, beautiful machine that had trusted her enough to keep fighting past its limits. 27 men were alive because she and this warthog had decided mathematics mattered less than will. Her father would have understood. "Sir, it's just the job." The word spread through Bagram faster than official channels could contain it. By the time Alina arrived back via helicopter 6 hours later, everyone knew. The captain who'd flown a dying A-10 into a valley that should have been her grave. The pilot who'd made 4 gun runs while on fire, refused to break station during extraction, and then dead-sticked a crippled aircraft onto a runway with 0 hydraulics. The operations center had archived the entire mission, every radio call, every targeting camera feed. Officers who dismissed her that morning were watching the footage in silence. The video showed the A-10's first gun run, the precision of that initial pass. Showed the moment the RPG struck the left engine, the smoke that should have ended the mission. Showed Alina diving back into the valley anyway, circling like a guardian angel carved from titanium and fury. The colonel who defended her during the mission stood near the archived footage, waiting. When Alina entered the operations center, the room went quiet. Not the uncomfortable silence of before, but something different, something that felt like recognition. The colonel approached her, extended his hand. "Captain Vasquez, Colonel James Harrington. I flew Sandies in Vietnam pulling rescue cover for downed pilots. I've seen a lot of close air support in my career." He gestured at the screens. "I've never seen anything like what you did today." Alina shook his hand, exhausted beyond words. "Colonel, I just followed the tactical situation to its logical conclusion." Harrington laughed, a sound without humor. "Captain, there was nothing logical about what you did. You flew into an ambush with insufficient ammunition, took critical damage, and continued prosecuting targets while your aircraft was literally on fire. Then you remained on station until extraction was complete and flew a dead aircraft 18 miles to landing." He paused, his expression serious. "That's not logic, that's something else entirely." Other officers were gathering now, drawn by the conversation. A major who'd been dismissive that morning spoke up. "Captain, I owe you an apology. When we sent you out, I thought." Alina cut him off, not unkindly. "You thought I was the last option. I was. Sometimes last options work out." The major shook his head. "No, ma'am, I thought you were a liability. I was wrong, profoundly wrong." Harrington gestured toward the screens again. "Captain Webb and his entire company are being debriefed right now. Every single soldier is telling the same story. They thought they were dead. They'd accepted it. Then you showed up and decided physics could negotiate." Alina looked at the footage of her A-10 circling the valley, smoke streaming behind it. She remembered every second of that flight, every decision compressed into microseconds, every moment when the